Ow. So in the very first video, we talked, and indeed I showed, what the image quality on a camera like this should look like. Now that's dependent on a variety of factors, and we're going to go through those one by one. But let's go backwards a little bit and actually explain what something like this was meant to be used for at the time. So in the early days of standard definition, that's very much a lie. In the later days of standard definition, the broadcast video industry was starting to get quite long in the tooth for it. There hadn't really been a major successor in quite a few decades, and that was due primarily to the way that CRT televisions operated at the time with a maximum of 525 lines. In the United States, that equivalated, if that's a word, to 480 lines of interlaced video. In 1995, Sony released the digital video format, otherwise known as DV. Now, along with it came many of its brothers: Mini DV, DV Cam, HD Cam, I think DV Cam SR? There were a lot of these things. Now, this particular camera runs off of DV Cam. However, it can run in DV as well. I discussed in my last video kind of what the differences were, but to give you a short list, basically all it did was change the color rendering a little bit and slightly improve the image quality by running the tape about 30% faster in order to increase the amount of density going onto the tape at one time. This particular camera doesn't obviously look all that big. Now, aside from the big telephoto lenses and huge television cameras that you would have used, I don't know, let's say in a stadium at the time, from way up in the stands, like NASCAR, for instance. Those were the big boys. These guys were meant to be more portable. So let's say you were a news team and you wanted to go cover a quick scene, and you needed to get in a vehicle that was ready to go immediately. These would be sitting on a shelf inside, along with some other broadcasting equipment, antenna tuners, amplifiers, stuff like that. And out in the field, you would use these. Now, what you don't see on the back of this camera, because I don't have one, even though I would very much like to, but we'll get to why that doesn't make any sense here in a minute, is a piece of gear called the WRR-855. This is a UHF synthesizer that would have taken the belt clip mic that a reporter would have worn and fed the audio directly to this particular machine. That was step one in the process. Step two would have been to record whatever it was onto a tape inside here, which I can show you. Wrapping tape around a drum is, I think at least it's pretty cool. Makes some fun noises. But over the years, when it's kind of started to wear down a little bit and nothing's really greased, it's not meant to be greased. Don't grease these. You will clog up your heads. It gets to sounding a little concerning, but they were meant for this. The other step in this process would have been to take the 26-pin connector on the back and run it directly to a VTR. Now, again, that would basically turn this thing into a fancy imaging sensor, but you could still throw it over your shoulder, record what you needed to, and have the plug go back into the van, where it would then record onto tape, but also spit out to live television. The last way you could have done this is simply to ignore running at the tape at all. A lot of studios didn't necessarily do this because it's nice to have a hard copy of things, but it was an option. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take the battery off. I mainly wanted to show you this because I had a real hard time finding a battery for this thing when turns out it's just a V-mount battery. I didn't know what this was. This is my first introduction into true AV broadcast video, or indeed anything heavy-duty equipment AV. Turns out these are very common. You just need to know what the term is to search for them. I had 3 of the originals. They were all shot. I mentioned before that these tapes will be finite and eventually disintegrate, and there are a limited amount of them in the universe now, which is, kind of sad. But redundancy is still redundancy, and I think that having one of these laying around is a pretty good idea. Now let's talk about the camera itself. She's heavy. I think she weighs about 7 pounds. And the body alone is made of, if it's not aluminum, then I would be surprised. Is it? Yeah, it's probably aluminum. I've had this thing apart. It's amazing how modular this particular camera is. You take the lens off, you take the viewfinder off, you start taking off the side panels, and you realize this thing was meant to be serviced. These things were not designed in order to have a limited lifespan. These things, there are four individual daughter boards that slide into a main motherboard on the bottom. This is so brilliant, and I love it so much, because it means if any one component breaks, 20 minutes, that's all it takes. And I knew nothing about this camera. I'm good at taking stuff apart, but it's so simple. I wish I could take it apart. I wish it was in pieces. I wish I'd saved any sort of the footage to show you. The only reason it took me so long is because I didn't know what was broken in it. Turns out the pinch roller was junk, but I think the only thing that ever breaks on these things. The lens itself is a Virginian unit with a manual focus ring, which is interesting to me because it has teeth for an automatic focus ring. The zoom is also automatic via these particular buttons here. I have it switched to manual. I think particularly it's too slow for me. And the iris is automatic as well. That's the only thing I pretty much leave on automatic, unless I'm using it for broadcasting here in my studio. At that point, I use this. This is actually a camera control remote from this particular era. And depending on how long this video gets, I may go over that because it is extraordinarily useful in more ways than one. Using this thing by its own, even if you have a two-man crew, sucks. Mainly because this particular viewfinder up here is a mini CRT display with a monochrome system inside with adjustable brightness, peak, and contrast levels. What that means is you're never really going to know, unless you have a live feed, what the image is actually looking like. So everything from the focus to the white balance could be off. So while we're on this side, let's start looking at some of the inputs and outputs here on the camera. So this is where the majority of them are going to live. You don't really have any on this side, which is why I'm not showing you yet. There are some in the back, but we'll talk about those later. To start with, you have RCAs, which are for your audio channel 1 and 2, in and out. You also have BNC connectors for time codes, both in and out. I still don't know what those are. This thing speaks it to something in the broadcast industry. I could take an educated guess what it was for, but I'm not going to bother because, well, I'm not exactly going to tell you wrong. I don't want to be that guy. You also have a monitor out, which I have used before. It outputs composite. I don't have a good way to capture composite, which is funny because just about everybody on the planet has a good way to capture composite. I only have a way to capture RGB and component, which that speaks very well. This does not. By this point, we had come up with a lot better of a solution, and that was basically S-Video at the time. It was called Super, so Super Video. At least that's what I'm hoping it is, because just about everything on this thing is labeled Super, and that translates to S-Video, at least the way that this is talking to itself. What it does, real quick, is all those different things that I mentioned before, it separates them into little pins. And of course, it keys it correctly so you don't screw it up. On the front, we have the two ports that I mostly care about, and that is the remote as well as the lens port. The remote uses something like this, which is a locking barrel connector, to talk to one of these. Again, very useful when you're all by yourself, but still useful nonetheless, even if you're a full crew. The other port on the front of this that you can't really see is the lens port. Now, I talked about this particular lens having a lot of automatic features, and that is good and by design. But if we take a look at this particular lens, you'll notice it has some contact pins on it, just like a modern DSLR or mirrorless camera. This was specific and special to the DSR series. The DSR-300 and the 500, I know in particular, used these types of lenses, which made cable management very easy. Good for if you're on the road. Obviously, the body itself has these contacts in order to accept this. So why then am I not using the lens cable in the front? Because I don't need it. Let's say this was a broadcast camera that sat in the middle of a studio and it has a much more sophisticated lens on it. Well, those particular camera bodies didn't have those contact pins. Even if your lens may have, it couldn't talk to these. Just about every one that I see on eBay for sale that's not a DSR-300 or a 500 doesn't have those. And even then, it uses a slightly different locking mechanism on the front. So the lens port is designed to plug a cable into this hand unit here, where your palm goes, in order to supply power to the automatic features such as the iris, focus, and zoom. Taking a look at the front of the camera, we see the viewfinder as well as the attached shotgun mic. I've actually used this microphone. It is the original to the unit. It's 25 years old, and it does still work very well. It needs a little bit of help, but just like everything, including the amount of echo that's in this room, which no, I cannot control, I'm sorry. Even with a condenser mic this close, it's still decently bad. This works the same. This is a unidirectional microphone, hence the shotgun type. It takes in slight ambient noise in from the grates on the side, but mainly this all comes from the front. I've had people stand off to my left and right and behind me. They are audible, but not very. If you really want to be noticed, you stand in front. It's very, very good at this. I have subjects that are sometimes 100 feet away, and they are still clearly audible, as opposed to someone who is 10 feet behind me. It is removable with this little thumb screw, and I forgot it does that. And it attaches on the front here via just your standard 3-pin XLR. I have to put a little piece of plastic or paper towel in mine to kind of keep it upright. The weather seal gaskets have gone out over the years, and she kind of likes to get a little droopy. She's old. The rest of this disaster on the front is the actual viewfinder itself. Now, it features a few things on the front, such as a display switch, because you can have this turned on and off. For instance, like I said, if it was running to a remote and a live feed, you wouldn't have this on. It just doesn't make any sense. No need to run the CRT when there's, no need to. That's not really a problem these days, but back in the days when CRTs had measurable lifespans, especially considering the work these were doing day in and day out, that was nice to have. The other option is a tally light. I unplugged it. And if you don't know, all a tally light does is basically tell the person in front of you or the studio that's watching you whether or not you're recording. Now you can turn this up or down, so it does have a dim function. Wow, you can probably barely see that. So it does have 3 positions, dim, off, and on. I like to keep it on just because it's kind of cool. It doesn't really do me any good. There is a tally light on the back as well. I just keep them both on because it's neat. And by the way, this whole assembly is removable, though I caution you, if you ever get one of these, or for the love of, if you ship one of these, take this off. I got mine, and this front adapter here, this little square plate, completely destroyed. I had to painstakingly put it together 3 times before I finally found an epoxy that kept it together. And even then, what a pain. The broadcast versions of these learned from this, and this was actually metal. So later on, by the way, there's a little LED here on the back. That's kind of cool for darker nighttime use, so you can still see the settings that you have on your lens. The main thing I wanted to show you here was this guy. Very weird looking connector, but he's kind of fun. This supplies all of the data and the power to the CRT itself, as well as the commands for your switches and your peaks, your brightness, your contrast, so on and so forth. Looking at the side of the camera, we start to notice the toggles on the bottom, and this is where some of the most important quick reference switches on this camera are located. So to first start off, we have a double momentary switch for the menu. Now you can use this to toggle through in a couple of different ways, but it controls the through viewfinder menu, which is responsible for things like your detail level, your black levels, your white levels, all sorts of things, including the message that is seen when you play your bars selector. Yes, you can actually put a custom message there. Usually it's the company logo or the letters associated, something like that. Next, we have your white balance switch. So you have two available presets, A and B, and then you have the auto switch, which is controlled via the toggle down here at the front of the camera, just under the lens. This is useful to have presets when you have something like this, where the lighting really doesn't change. Same thing with outdoors. You can build both of them. Or if you're somewhere new and you don't quite know how to set it up yet, switch it to automatic and set via the switch up front. Pretty simple. The one in front of that is a DCC, DL, and bars switch. So depending on the mode and the lighting that you want to use or have available, you can use DCC Plus or DL. I don't know what the difference is between the two. All I know is that you use DCC Plus to kind of help the color correction indoors a little bit, and DL, which I can only imagine stands for daylight, and that's if I'm correct. What's most interesting to me here is actually the hot switch for your bars. So that's this. That plays every time at the beginning of my videos. Why do we use bars? For one, they're good at calibration, but it's also very useful if you need to cut the feed very, very quickly and don't have time to wait on a production man or whoever's overseeing the operation. So at that point, it's just up to you. Hey, need it, off, done, cut, period. These two knobs up front are used to control your monitor as well as your alarm volume. I don't really know what the monitor is for. I have never personally used it, but considering what the rest of these are, I'm going to assume that they are volume controls. The back one here is for your alarm, which will set off the tally light as well as a code if it's necessary, or whatever message that's displayed for the error that's it's incurring. Now this alarm can be used for many things, such as a tape transport failure, a daughter board failure, a feature failure, or you're just running out of tape. It's very annoying, and if you're not paying attention and you're using the front microphone and the sensitivity is set up a little too high and the alarm is set too high, it can actually interrupt your audio, so be aware. Speaking of audio, there's the two dials on the back here that control the individual input volumes for channels 1 and 2. Now, they're mixed together with the front microphone through the single XLR port, but then on the back here, they're switched. They're split, actually. So between channels 1 and 2, you have two dedicated ports for your XLR inputs. Something I didn't mention earlier is the actual switches above these ports can change what kind of input source you have selected. Either a mic, a line, or phantom power. That's right, this thing can do 48 volts for a condenser microphone. That's pretty useful, especially for me, because I don't like using this thing in here. I'd rather use something like this. From my understanding, it really does not pull that much amperage or drain the battery as fast as you think it would. It still does, but it doesn't really matter if you have an adapter like this and you just plug it into the DC 12 volt source in the back here. Not exactly like you're worried about draining a battery. When we start flipping panels open is when things get really complicated. This is the part that makes you really realize that this was never designed to be in consumer hands. There's so many controls here, I don't even know what half of them do. There's things for menu control, and I'm not talking about this one in here. I'm talking about the one in here. This discusses a ton of things, including debug and self-tests that I just forget about it. I don't touch it. The most useful thing I've ever done with this particular menu is set the clock, and that's because this little CMOS battery in here died. Some of the things that this is capable of doing is changing your time code inputs, or like what else? I don't even know anymore. Your VTR triggers, Your resets. Oh, that hyper gain switch. Right, I don't think I talked about that. So down here, your gain switch. Oh, I missed that completely. Your gain switch, that's important. Backtrack for a little bit here. Let's say you're in a studio like this where the lighting is kind of meh and you've run out of light, so to speak, or you're in a dark environment. You don't have a flash up here or a light that's hooked up to your D-tap. A gain can be a very useful tool. You can have upwards 18. Low is 0, medium is 9, and 18 is high. When you have it switched to 9 or 18, there's a little light in here that will show that says gain up, just to let you know that it's on. The reason you don't want to use this, if at all possible, is simply because it's noisy. And I don't mean audibly. When you switch when you switch any gain on, a visual increase in noise is very, very noticeable. So you don't want to use it as much as you possibly can. It's like turning the ISO up a bit on your DSLR or even on your film camera if we're going that far back. So use it sparingly. And then there's this. Hypergain is a technology that Sony marketed for a reason. I don't know what the reason was, but it was a reason. You can get 40 dB of gain out of this switch. I have no clue why you would want to do that. Maybe in ultra low lighting situations where you basically have nothing, or you're restricted to not have enough, or to not have a light on the front. It's usable. It is useful. I just don't know why you would ever want to actually do it unless you're trying to like simulate night vision, I guess. There are 4 switches back here that I actually do care about, and they are both, all 4 of them, related to audio. You'll notice there's 2 dials up top here that actually stick through the cover. These are your volume control for your inputs for channels 1 and 2. They are individual, so let's say that you have a subject that is sitting off to the right, but you don't want to focus directly on them because there's something behind them that you want the audience to see. Well, you use this to compensate. So you would increase the volume on channel 1 left, and then keep channel 2 maybe relatively the same. So these switches up top are for auto versus manual control. This camera is capable of automatically adjusting each one in order to go to a preset level, either by Sony. You may be able to change it. I'm not sure. I've never tried. Or you can flip it to manual mode and do it via these 2 knobs yourself. Personally, I prefer this. The 2 switches under it control where on the camera the audio source for channels 1 and 2 come from, either from the shotgun mic in the front, the 2 individual channel 1 and 2 ports on the back, or I don't know actually, because there's see, the last time I looked at this, I didn't actually know what this was. WRR, which is the wireless transceiver for a pack mic. So at that point, if you had them switched to that, they would talk through the WRR transceiver through these little contact pins. All right, that's clever, Sony. I'll give you that. There's one more in here that I don't know what it is, and I'll just tell you because why not? VJ. Don't know what that means. I'm not a big AV guy. I can do basic lighting controls and audio mixing, and I can get EQs more or less down correctly because I've got a half decent ear. But Lord knows it's not my field, especially when it comes to non-consumer products like this. Actually, using this camera is very simple. You put a battery on, you flip the switch, you put a tape in, and you hit record. Now, this machine is so heavy that it does have to sit on your shoulder with a pretty comfortable shoulder pad, I might add. And at the expense of my hair here, that's about what it's supposed to look like. What really sucks about these cameras is that they were kind of meant to be on pedestals, even though they were field cameras. There is no stabilization in these lenses. So if you are zoomed way in, every micro movement you make is going to translate to jitter on the final tape. So what you have to do is be very precarious and adjust the viewfinder to where it's right in line with your eye. Then use your ear, which also happens to be in line with a speaker, so that's very nice if you're listening to its monitor, which is probably the monitor dial now that I think about it on the front. And you gotta move real slowly. You ain't moving your head, you're moving your whole upper body here. And if you're tracking movement, good luck, because it's difficult the second you get above around what, 15 mil on the zoom. After all that, it's basically you go to town just like a normal handheld camcorder. There are a lot of things that consumer camcorders do have in common with these kinds of machines. The biggest difference is all of the technical stuff that this thing can do is more or less hidden behind menus that consumers were never really concerned about. That sort of thing is important though when you're in a production environment and you need hot switches for these sorts of things. You can't be bothered with going into menus just to be able to quickly select where your audio is coming from. That's basically it. That's the DSR-300. And to be honest, just like the VTR behind me, the DSR-1500, the instructions for this, generally speaking, carry over to pretty much all of the devices that ran DV at the time. They're all the same, really. They just have slightly different feature sets. All the points that I gave you are the same in terms of how you operate one of these things. There just may be a few more hidden things behind the menu that you and I don't really care about, so it doesn't matter. Next, we're going to look at this thing. This is an RM M7G, which is a remote control for one of these cameras. It's a lot of fun. It makes my life so much easier, so I don't have to get up, go switch something over, record to the tape, rewind the tape, throw it in the 1500, play it back, make sure the white balance is right, realize it's wrong, do it all over again, realize the audio's wrong, do it all over again, and spend 2 hours in setup. It sucks. Go find one of these. They're fun. They're not inexpensive. I mean, I paid $300 for mine, but relatively speaking, they're not inexpensive. Go buy some tapes. Go have fun. You know, videography, at least from the standard definition era, was largely dismissed because it looks like junk. But it doesn't have to. It's 480i. Let's just be clear about that. But it doesn't have to be the crap that you remember from when you were a kid. DV and even component makes such a big difference in the quality of the shooting with these cameras. It's not even funny. Just don't use composite and you'll have a great time.